Okay. I think we're all set. Welcome, everyone. We're super excited to get to launch the Quilt Podcast. This has been a really beautiful collaboration between us at Voices for Racial Justice, the UpTake, and then some wonderful people here that we have as our co-hosts that you'll get to know a little bit more during our conversation today. My name is Gabriella Anaïs. I'm co-director at Voices for Racial Justice, and I'm one of the co-hosts for the Quilt Podcast. And this idea really emerged in conversation with each of us, just coming together to ask, how do we draw hope in these moments? How do we find purpose and clarity for the path forward? The Quilt Podcast fosters conversations at the intersection of public policy, community organizing, journalism, art, and healing. This first season seeks to understand and answer the question, what is this moment calling for us to do together? We have this amazing crew of co-hosts, and I really want to have everyone introduce yourself and just briefly share what brings you into this collaboration.
My name is Kevin Reese, and I'm Director of Criminal Justice here at Voices for Racial Justice. And what brings me here, this is my familia, this is my fam. And I know I've sat around tables when this was a thought, and I've seen all of the hard work that we put into to be able to come to community through this medium and share our stories. So to be here today is just like, it's dope. Let's go.
My name is Cirien, and I'm the Executive Director for the UpTake, a local community news organization. I was actually trained as a community organizer by what used to be Organizing Apprenticeship Project. I'm currently recording this from the office of my old trainer. Things like to go around. I'm here because, once again, like Kevin said, this is family. You know, these people are family. So I'm here because I want to see what we can do and the power we can build together as a family.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brett Grant. I'm Research and Policy Director at Voices for Racial Justice. And I am here because I need a space to be able to reflect with family, as everyone said, and to be able to dream with family.
My name is MK. I am also a family member of this beautiful ecosystem. We can call it Voices for Racial Justice. We can call it UpTake. We can call it St. Paul Promise Neighborhood. We can call it the beloved, resilient community that we are trying to build to withstand any kind of political tumult and uncertainty. I am a mother and a connector and a culture worker that is based in Wapakudi land, St. Paul, Minnesota, Frogtown area, born and raised downtown St. Paul, and then migrated over to what I call the magical town square. I'm gonna name it Hamlin Midway, Union Park, Rondo Summit University, and Frogtown. I'm gonna name my St. Paul and center St. Paul up in this place. Other beloved communities that I'm a part of: Education for Liberation Network, Ethnic Studies Coalition, the Viet Solidarity and Action Network, the Seed Project, St. Paul Promise Neighborhood. I think I said that before. Root and Restore, Coalition for Asian American Leaders, Development Without Displacement, Midway Rise Up, Victoria Theater Arts Center, Maxfield Elementary School, Parent Teacher Association. Just want to name all the people who touch me and all the work that I do with my beloveds in this local ecosystem. So that's what's up. MK.
Love. Hi, everyone. It's really good to be with all of you today. And my name is Luna. I am brought to this conversation because I'm really drawn to and inspired by work that sits at the many intersections of racial and gender and social and economic justice and public policy. And there are many of those intersections. That work is what brought me into relationship with all of these amazing people. And at this particular convergence and conversation, there's a lot of creativity, a lot of joy, and a lot of envisioning for the future. And that's really exciting.
there's so much love in this digital space we have here. All these people have been just a really important part of my own journey and my own path around organizing and just work as being a culture worker in the community. I have to say that my grounding into storytelling comes from my own family lineage of just artists and activists that have shown me early on that our stories are powerful. Our stories can save lives. Our stories can change lives. And I come today from many different diasporas, from many different lineages of folks who've fought really hard so that I can be here and so that I can be kind of walking into this space with you all. And I'm really inspired by the possibility of a digital storytelling space like this podcast to really imagine together. And we're really at a crossroads of what is this new world that is being born right now. We're in a big major shift that we're all experiencing. And so what a beautiful way to do that together through story. So I'm really, really thrilled, really honored to be here with everybody today. I'm really excited to have our brother and colleague, Kevin Reese, who's going to kick us off with a poem.
Thank you, sis. What's a poem without context, right? This poem was a poem I wrote while I was still in prison when we was working on the actual physical Quilt podcast, and like we were storytelling. It was like, Kev, tell a little bit of your story. And I wrote this poem. It came from a conversation that you and I had, Gabby. We were having a natural check-in, one of our conversations, and the title of this poem came as one of our solutions or aha moments. And this is village makers. We came to the conclusion that's who we are. That's what we do. We are village makers. So I want to share this poem with y'all this morning. Our neighborhood is built on a slanted hill, and all traffic flow down. Spirits spike the air like crushed fiberglass. We all have strong forearms from wringing out mops by hand. Our grandmothers weave our clothes from bull skin. We are matter. So bull skin is weaved from us. It can always rain, so we are always weaving. Our wrists ache at the mention of ships, and now we are drums, weaved together with cedar wood and skin. We transmit memory when we dance. Remember, we've built Capitol buildings before. The streets echo when we march because our feet are sledgehammers. We bury our children's teeth in the pasture so their voices can grow. Not change, but grow. We are not what we see. We are who we are. Thank you.
Wow, I want to say holy SHIT and all the expletives, but I'm not. Kevin, thank you so much for this beautiful offering. I just want to, we transmit memory when we dance. Remember, we built Capitol buildings before. We bury our children's teeth in the pasture so that their voices can grow. Not change, but grow. We are not what we see. We are what we are. So as we were imagining this podcast, many of our earlier conversations drew upon the power of cultural knowledge in our communities. And I want us to share with you how we arrived in this moment here, building off of the words that our family member Kevin offered to us. So Brett, I remember in 2017, after another intense year of, BIPOC beloveds who are aligning themselves with the way of the heart and who are also, testing our power and participation at the state legislative space. You invited me to this gathering at this beautiful space that I've never, ever been to before in South Minneapolis called Solomon's Table. I went in, it was this church, but it wasn't a church, but it was a church. And like I remember being there, and you inviting me there to help, to just be a part of the space and debrief and unwind and metabolize. And I think the title of the event was called Breathe and Heal, right? And that was like the moment that was like a space that VRJ had created for us to be able to come together and breathe and heal from the extractive parts of our experience at the state legislative space. And I just remember eating really good food. And I just remember drink like just down in the La Croix water, you know, and like we sat together and like just prioritize our spirits, prioritize cultivating a space, right, where we can nurture each other, right? And that was a space like where I was first. It was 2017. I think like Adrienne Marie Brown had just published like Emergent Strategy. And so that was the first time, you know, somebody introduced me to that book, and I was like, what is that? And that SHIT changed my life. By Kevin. But it offered language to things that I've been feeling for a really long time. And I also remember, you know, I just remember that space, like there was like people upstairs who were making tinctures and like, you know, and there were some people like in the other room, like practicing somatics together. And I never been in a space like that, at least at the state legislative or state level, like policy level. And I just remember like wanting more of that. Right. But before we even go even further, like maybe I can hear from you, Brett. I'm going to throw it to you to talk a little bit more about what that event at Solomon's Table meant, you know, for us here and now, and other things that you want to share. So go ahead, Brett.
No, thanks, MK. Yeah, I really remember that event. Solomon's Table was like you said, this magical place. And I remember that room, there were like couches and cushions and just all these kind of lounge areas. And this was a place that we had decided to have this conversation, this deep conversation about policy in. And, you know, it was in 2017 and I just come to Voices in 2015. And right when I came there, we were having these deep conversations around healing justice and really, you know, trying to ground and contextualize all of our work in this healing justice framework. And so I felt like this event, the Breathe and Heal event, was an example of us trying to figure out, okay, how do we do this with policy? And so one of the first things, you know, we did was we selected this place, this magical place with these cushions and just lounge chairs. And then, you know, we collaborated with the People's Movement Center. And that was like a local BIPOC group of healing practitioners. And so we had this conversation, this really laid back conversation around state legislative policy and you know, what people were doing and the hopes and aspirations they had for racial justice and policy in Minnesota. But then after the conversation, we had these stations. One was a massage station, another one was like some dancing. Like you said, tinctures were being made. And the one image that will always stand out in my mind is I remember I walked out and there was this woman in a blue dress and she was just twirling and dancing. And I'll never forget that image because I was like, wow, this is at a policy meeting, you know, like this is happening. We're dancing and healing at a policy event. And so the next thing we had after that was Our Minnesota. And I'll kick it back to you, MK, to share some words about that.
Yeah, I remember Our Minnesota, you know, that Our Minnesota came a little bit like, I think a year after. So
yeah,
it was,
I think
it was
it's,
at the end of the 2018 the 2018 legislative session?
I think so, or it could have been the 2017. I don't remember. Yeah.
2017. No, I think it was the 2018. Man, years be blurring, don't they? Yeah, I remember us, I remember right after that event, right after the woman in the blue dress was twirling, like all of us were really clear that we wanted more of this and that we needed to figure out how to organize ourselves to continue this kind of work, right? And I think at the time we were talking a lot about growing new public DNA, right? We asked ourselves a lot about, we call Elder or Ricardo Levins Morales in the room a lot as we asked ourselves, like, how is our soil, right? What can we do today to ensure that our that the seeds, right, that the soil is ready for new seeds to grow, to be planted and to grow? What seeds might we plant together today that could make a difference for the future of our Minnesota? And I actually remember that, our Minnesota being like two words that we named a lot in this space. And I think it was, you, Brett, that offered that the learning that you that you had gathered from just conversations that you've had with water rights activists, Thorne LaPointe and Nguyen, about our Minnesota. Actually, maybe you can share a little bit about that.
Yeah, that was like the poetic vision. I remember it was during one of our VRJ like organizing cohorts, and I met Thorne and Nguyen, and they were sharing knowledge about the language of Minnesota and the origin of it. And they just talked about how that term Minnesota meant the mist that was rising up off of the lakes. And then I learned something from another elder, and I shared this video where he was saying, well, there's also this language of Minnesota, which means the land where the waters reflects the clouds or something like that. And so, all of this at the time we were thinking about like this healing vision, and just to be introduced to this term, it just gave our whole policy frame this poetic vision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I remember at the time, Resma Menakem, I'm actually not sure when Resma wrote the book My Grandmother's Hand, but I remember in 2018 was when I came across it, and when we started coming across it, and that we were bringing in the concepts that he offers in My Grandmother's Hands about dirty pain and the violence that travels across people when we don't allow like our body the time and space to metabolize the pain, our pain, or transform it into clean pain. And I remember all of us being able to be really vulnerable in that space, and really centering this idea that we are all hurting, right? That no one is exempt from that, and that no one is exempt from that colonial violence that has taken place in many of our ancestral homelands, and that's something that we are carrying with us, most likely unmetabolized. And that I remember us asking ourselves during that time, as people, Indigenous and settlers on Dakota land, like what dirty pain does our public body need to metabolize so that the waters in the land of the 10,000 public policymakers and shakers, like how do we play clean enough to so that our work reflects the journey, that our journey and reflect each other. And so, that was so this is definitely a part of a continuation of this work. Another thing that from emergent strategy and from just like the conversation that we have around soil, we talk a lot about mycelium cultivation and how, the gatherings that we have, right, when we can expand and contract, like the heart, when we go and we do our work, and then we go deep, we ground, we root, we plant, and then we come back to each other. like a lot of this work, we talked a lot about mycelium cultivation, right? And how, and just this idea of like, well, how do we talk to each other without, when we sometimes can't talk to each other? And I think podcasting, was something that we've been talking about for a few years, right? That came out of the conversations that we started having around, how do we, build that resilient network, or how do we create that space, right, where we can continually nurture each other, right? And so, yeah, Brett, if you have anything more to add, around that, would love to hear you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the only other thing I'll add is that, it was kind of, I think during this time too, that we were doing a community assessment of our policy tools. And, Luna was working with us also, and was doing like, I think an internship with us as part of the Humphrey School. But we were really hearing from the community that, they really wanted us to focus our policy tools on storytelling and art and healing. And a lot of that was kind of captured in Luna's thesis. I don't know, maybe Luna, do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I can hop in. Yeah, it was, I think that I started working with Voices for Racial Justice around the time that conversations had already been happening around how to transform what had been, a 12 plus year long run of a really robust policy tool at the Capitol, a report card on racial equity, how to transform that into a tool that was resonant for community learning and what the opportunities for that might be. And so it was cool to be able to speak with youth fellows at Voices for Racial Justice and the team and sort of put together some options and opportunities for what racial equity policy tools in the state could look like. And Brett, one of the conversations we had a lot was about the James Baldwin quote, if I love you, I have to make you aware of the things which you do not see, and bringing that into a policy context and a power and legislative capital context, and then also just thinking about love and joy and public policy. And it's interesting to see, I feel like a lot of those conversations are bursting now, but the seeds were happening years ago. And I think I'll toss to Cirien, because I think shortly after my work with Voices, or likely at the same time, the UpTake was involved in sort of making quilting for policy a reality.
Thank you for that. So right around the beginning of 2019, the UpTake, which is a community news organization, was going through its own transformation and transition. And we were really being mentored by organizers and leaders from across the Twin Cities and even out of state, people who are helping us become this organization, community journalism organization committed to racial and social justice. We had a methodology that that's called journalism of color. That's about putting the power of community journalism into the hands of our communities, communities like ours, our BIPOC communities, and about making that journalism look and feel like our communities. And, individuals like Brett, people at Voices, they were, mentors in helping make that work a reality. The quilt came about in a number of ways, but, in terms of the UpTake's participation, but it was about really supporting that evolution on our organization's end, and about trying to find a new way to ground our work, trying to quilt together, to weave together, to ground our work in the different cultural communities and traditions of storytelling and healing, ways of trying to do that work, and our desire to work, on the UpTake Center on policy reporting, but doing it in a way that it looked like our communities, and that we were building our power. Our communities were building their power through the UpTake, through this kind of vision of the quilt. We wanted to bring our cultural practices into our policy reporting work. We wanted to bring our sense of community into that policy reporting work. And we wanted to do so because we know that quilting in so many of our communities has really deep meaning. And we wanted to do that because we also see quilting as symbolic of the relationships that we were building, of the storytelling that we were doing, of the ways that we brought in storytelling and healing and art and policy and community journalism simultaneously Again, quilting all of those together. The first edition of the Quilt magazine, the Quilt Policy, Art, and Healing, was released in October 2019, and it centered policy, poetry, art, journalism, stories, healing, action, and it was distributed all over the city and through various networks. In fact, I know of at least 100 copies that made it to Philadelphia. For me, I'd also heard that poem that Kevin so graciously shared at the beginning that definitely made me cry. That was, for me, that was a sign of how powerful the quilt was. And I will say you can find that poem, you can find the Quilt magazine at thequiltmagazine.com online. And for me, the quilt, again, is symbolic of the work that we've done. My organization, the UpTake, our organization, is built through and because of relationships. The quilt gave us a map on how to build like meaningful relationships that move our important work forward together, and it helps the UpTake create space within the work of racial justice that, you know, helps us do our job of helping our communities build power through community journalism. So I'm gonna want to pass it on to Gabby because we have this huge origin story that we've just told, and I want to pass it on to Gabby to talk about what's next.
Yeah, thank you. Like Cirien said, that's really the elevation of our origin story. It's a little lengthy because I think you can get a sense of just how long we've been in conversation and just the long lineage that this podcast comes into, which I think is a really beautiful reminder of just deep relationships that can, you know, create something really beautiful. And so, you know, the ideation for a podcast specifically really started about a year ago, but, you know, then 2020 brought a global pandemic, economic and climate crisis and collapse, all these ongoing chaotic moments that we're having to live through and deeply painful moments that are impacting all of us individually, collectively, are certainly having, you know, an impact just on our collective bodies and spirits around pain and grief and loss and isolation. And so, you know, as we organized more around this podcast, we were facing the new questions that were coming up for us personally and in our communities. We were bringing to each other. We were being in conversation with each other about what does this look like to hold a space? What is the hope and potential for digital storytelling to help us all hold this moment together? And so it's just, as this year continues to shift and increase in intensity, you know, this kind of ebb and flow of heightened intensity and then kind of more calm and ease at different moments, we really landed on a question that has become the heart of our first season. And I'm going to ask everyone to share your answer. And the question is, what is this moment calling on us to do together?
I have spent maybe too much time thinking about this question. I love it so much. And I think, I mean, I speak from two hats. As an organizer, as somebody who's in community, who's with community, I think we need to start leaning into one another in the same way that we built this quilt. We leaned into one another, into who we are. We allowed our relationships to guide the work. We reimagined how we do our work, and to reimagine what our work is. But I'm also a community journalist. And though I use journalism as a tool to organize, journalism doesn't happen in the same way that the Quilt magazine or the Quilt podcast typically happen. I want, as community journalists, for us to reimagine what our work looks like when we're in community, what our work looks like when we're working in a way that we're incorporating many different kind of strands and streams of work. I have deep love for this question because I think it asks us to take a look at who we are within our movements and breathe into that, and to lean into that, and to lean into our relationships and let those be guides for how we do, and to let it be emergent, and to let it be healing, and to let it be joyful, and to allow ourselves to be our full selves within the work that we do, instead of just being, for me, a journalist here or an organizer there or an educator somewhere else, but to instead be all of those things when I can be, in a way that allows it to be healing rather than, you know, detrimental and taking away and sort of locked within this paradigm of this is what, you know, a professional person looks like, and kind of stripping that away from the community.
I'll hop in. Also, if people see me looking down, I am always jotting down notes during these conversations to capture little bits of sort of the wisdom and things that coalesce. A few thoughts that continue to come up for me as we've discussed this conversation or this question this year. One is really what I envision as sort of a dance and a balance between, particularly in response to, you know, amplified movement work for racial justice, but also in response to all of the truths that have been really underscored this year. Among them being that as community has known, right, policy needs to be informed by community and by stakeholders and be done in a different way. But I've been thinking about sort of this balance between the sense of urgency to really just like do the work that in some ways has been planned and discussed for so many years, like let's just do it. And also to resist the sense of urgency that can come from white supremacy culture and that can come from capitalism and perfectionism, and to be able to balance the urgency and the energy with intention so that the work is done intentionally and beautifully and in relationship. So that's one thing I've been thinking about. And I know Gabi and MK, both of you in our conversations have shared wisdom from elders and ancestors that speaks to sort of a similar balance and dance. The other thing I think this moment is calling for us to do is make reparations. I have mentioned this piece in my communities many times over this summer, but Trey Johnson wrote a piece for the Washington Post this summer called "When Black People Are in Pain, White People Form Book Groups." And it's one of those messages that you just like exactly need to hear at the right time. And in the piece, he writes that, you know, for folks who are white, it can be, you know, if you're receiving mixed messages about how to be in movement for racial justice, like show up here, don't show up here, don't speak at this time, like read, but don't only read. He's like, that can be confusing, but that's also part of the work, right? And in the whole scheme of things, that discomfort is not really that uncomfortable. And so that's another way that I'm thinking about balance and dance is like rooting in education and also not just getting stuck there, and having ever evolving sort of balance and dance of action and reaction and quiet and learning and talking about books and not talking about books. And so I think for me, balance and dance are coming up, and dance came up earlier. So I like that's emerging in this conversation because dance has been a part of this conversation for years.
I love that you're bringing up balance into this. I do think that it's come up so much for us in conversations, you know, through the last few months. This, you know, 2020, and it's weird because for me, the couple years leading into 2020 felt like this accumulating energy that was like about to rupture. It really felt like that's what the world felt like to me. And when 2020 arrived the way that it did, that question of rupture was no longer something that was just kind of a passing thought. I found myself in a lot of spaces, including with all of you, talking about what is the meaning of this rupture that we're all experiencing? What is the lesson too? And, you know, to your point around ancestors and culture, that's been one of the most life-giving things about being in conversation with you all, because we all bring our cultural understandings and the knowledge that's been shared with us and family and community about how to hold moments of rupture. You know, how do we think about urgency in different ways? That's the other part that, you know, there can be such an organizing culture of everything is urgent, and it really gets into your bones and into your body. And so I think for myself, as someone who has chronic illness and has chronic pain, it becomes a really lived experience when everything feels like chaos. So I've really had to draw on this moment of how to be present with the difficulty of it, the unknown of it, the fear of it, because I think that's one of the things that's happening, is that our fears and griefs are just getting activated by this isolation and just everything that's happening around us. And so, I think I was reflecting on how do we find ease? How do we find grounding? Like, I don't think that things are going to slow down. I don't think that, I keep referring to it as chaos because that's what it feels like to me. But I think there's going to continue being these, chaotic things that can throw us for a loop. And so then I start thinking, what is it that we do for our own grounding, not just individually, but collectively, so that we're not just how we move and how we find solutions isn't going to be always from this pain, from this place of like intensified pain and grief and fear. Because that's actually, those things are really smart. There's a wisdom in how our bodies and our communities have learned to survive because of our acute awareness of when we are in danger. So that's a powerful thing. But then it's how do we use that as a powerful tool rather than get drowned under it, because that sense of hopelessness is something that is very real. And I see it within myself emerge, from time to time. I see it emerge in community. So I've been really thinking about how do we create different ways to regulate our own bodies and kind of the metaphorical body of our larger community that is really heightened right now. But one of the places I've been drawing strength, as I think of my own lineage and coming from long lineages of diasporas of survival, of resistance, of loss of culture at different points, of violence at different points, and then reflecting on through that, even though that is the case, that there are so many tools and knowledges and stories that have been passed down to help me, and my family experience this moment still with a sense of strength and a sense of imagining the future. That those are the things that I'm falling back on, is how do we curate more spaces where we get to share where do we draw strength from? Where do we draw hope from? Where do we get to say, I'm really scared, I don't have the answers? Where do we get to be wrong about, how we're moving through all of this, So those are some of the things that come to my mind. And, MK, you and I have also had a lot of conversations, particularly around, breaking, how do we begin to break these kind of cycles of ongoing urgency that are really breaking, can really break our spirits down.
I remember something you said, like, life is too urgent to move. Like, what was it, Gabby? You say this a lot.
That was the ancestral quote. I love it so much.
My abuelita used to say something, which many Mexican abuelitas, possibly other Latinx as well, but it's basically life goes slowly, life is too urgent, right?
To rush.
Yeah, so don't rush because I'm in a hurry.
Yeah.
Despacio que tengo prisa is the saying in Spanish. And yeah, thanks for that reminder. That is one of the earlier conversations I remember bringing that up.
All right. So what's coming up for me, Gabby, as you're sharing is and I think there's a Hawaiian elder named Elder Kalani Sauza who is helping me disrupt the internalized like racial monopoly capitalist and like in me, right? Or like internalized feelings of that. and how he's just like, yo, this is, you can see it as a disaster, or you can see it as a process, right? And I'm feeling the shift in me constantly, that the shifts that Ara Duroy always talks about, how, like, there is another world is here, another world is possible. And if we sit still, if we go and dig deep in the marrow of our bones where our ancestral wisdom lives, like, we will know, we will see, we will feel, and we will be able to walk into and live into it, right? And I'm thinking about things that I learned from, St. Paul Promise neighborhood, and from like just work in a collective impact world, and how, life is, it's like that double helix DNA. It's like that infinity 8, right? And how right now we are in this moment of like creative destruction, right? That's what it feels like. That's the chaos. Like, it is, that's the feeling. And it is a natural, like, it is a cycle. And it's a natural process. What Elder Kalani was talking about, at some point, like, it is, we are in the late stage capitalism. Racial monopoly capitalism has entered a very, very mature state, and that we are very crystal clear that something else is there, like something else is waiting for us. Something else is not waiting for us, but something else is another world is being created, right? And that we are in that transition. We are in that gray space. And that's why it feels so chaotic, because it feels like, if you watch like the last Spider-Man movie, that multiverse, it's like all the things are jumbling together, right? And that and that we're in the process of organizing, right? You see more organizing happening, you see more mutual aid happening, you see all this crazy stuff that's like hurting our hearts, but then you see stuff that is fortifying it as well, so I'm thinking about that. I'm holding that. Before the time slips us, I also want to say, that what has been grounding me has been me reflecting on, me being a Viet settler on Dakota Anishinaabe land. And I just be taking the 7 sacred prophecies to heart, right? And it's helped me kind of reassure, right, that if we keep organizing, if we fight, if we keep on going, right, we're going to light that 8th fire, right? Is that in the 7 sacred prophecy? I don't even know, I'm like, do we have time to even go in that? Maybe that's like another episode, y'all, that we got to dig into it to give it justice, right?
That would be great.
Yes.
But things that I'm really excited to talk to you about is, during our course of time together beyond, just today, is how do we, what are things that we could do to make sure to help our friends in Georgia be able to elect the right people in Senate, right? To move forward this Green New Deal. I am, and stopping that doomsday clock that we got going on in New York, Times Square right now, right? And stopping the Anthropocene, the 6th mass extinction period that we are inside of, and it's the fastest one. Because I want my children's children to be able to have a fighting chance to store this land too, and to be in the right relationship with this planet too, and all living relations on it. I am, what this moment calling for us to do is to start, really practicing our muscles towards transformative justice, community accountability, right? As we are ending our relationship, or as we are severing our ties in our relationship with this toxic and deadly police state, how are we going to be readying our muscles to resolve conflict, and to address harm that will show up, right? And another thing is really starting to pay attention to, and this is all like the decolonizing work that I'm crawling into right now as a little, at least intellectually, as a little baby, but also just like figuring out my local and local food and water systems, right? It is uncertain times. bioregionalism has to be something that we talk about more often on a regular, visibly from all stages of public governance, right? Watershed, like I've never heard of the word watershed until like 3 years ago, right? And I'm like, dang, I should have been knowing this in my as a kindergartner in SPP, in St. Paul schools, right? And which brings me to another thing is ethnic studies, which we'll be talking about a lot this year, as those fights are happening at the state level. But just thinking about local food and water systems, I'm really asking myself the question, like, do I know how to manage my or help steward, or do I even know how to get water from my own community, clean water? Do I know where food is in my neighborhood, in my local ecosystem, in my bioregion? And I'm not 100 on that, right? And I have a sneaky suspicion that many of us are not. And so there's a lot of, as we were walking into that new world, right? And traveling lightly, walking into that new world that Arundhati Roy says COVID has kind of opened a portal towards, is readying ourselves to be able to participate in that new world and thrive. That's where I'm at.
So I want to bring us full circle, and would love to just kind of close out our conversation today with having everyone share what's one way or one place you're drawing hope from these days.
Oh,
Brett, can you go first and also share what you want this moment to call us to do together? Because I don't know if you shared earlier.
Yeah, no, thanks. Yeah, that's a wonderful way to end, where, I'm getting joy, and what this moment is calling us to do together for me is to be together and to really study what that means. Like, to practice what it means to be together in a period of isolation. Because it's almost like this period of isolation is like preparation for that new world. And so how do we study this? The joy that I feel with just being with all of us right now is like such a joyful kind of study that I want to keep practicing and studying that. So that's what it is. And it's this, I think what's going to happen is that we are going to soar past the limitations that have been imposed on us for so long, but we have to do it together. So that's what I'm finding joy in, just being here.
I find a lot of peace in that answer, in that idea that this moment is preparation for something else. I'd actually quoted that quote that you all mentioned from Arundhati, whose name I'm mispronouncing, a few days ago on Facebook, because that idea that we're building towards something gives me joy, but the fact that I get to also get my hands dirty in that building process, that gives me joy. That I'm not sitting by and watching that world get built, but that I'm actively participating in the building of that world, that gives me joy. I also take a lot of joy right now in kind of the simple things, the fact that we have these relationships. It's simple, but it's true. It's really like this moment gives me joy. Kevin's poem, that somebody had so much love for this before it was even a thing, gives me intense joy. I was definitely crying, and I cry every time I hear that poem. The fact that when we talk about healing justice, it's not this far off thing, but it's actually this thing that we're building together, that gives me a sense of peace, and I find joy in the peace. The fact that each one of you is out there doing the work that you're doing, and that you're so powerful, that I get to learn from all of you. The intensity of that joy just cannot be said. I mean, I get to learn from each one of you, and that's just like the coolest thing that I get to do in my day. So that gives me maybe the most amount of joy.
I'm just honored to be amongst the collective wisdom whenever we have these conversations. I think similarly, what has been giving me joy and gratitude has been just like very pure appreciation for the beauty that my loved ones and those I'm in relationship with bring, like the qualities that they bring and the ways that they are wonderful in the world. That appreciation. Oh my goodness, look at this wonderful little one joining us. I think, Gabi, you were talking earlier about chaos and chaotic energy and how you don't feel like it's coming to an end anytime soon. And that actually, like in that moment, made me think of something beautiful, which is like, I was like, how can we reconceptualize chaos? Or like, when have I felt that a similar chaotic energy, but in a joyful and giving way and not in the way that we've been experiencing it? And is there a way that heightened energy may continue in a chaotic manner, but it might be the type of chaos like when you're dancing around, or like the chaos when you're surrounded by family and children are running about and playing, or that is making me emotional thinking about like what are other experiences that maybe feel chaotic but in a beautiful and joyful way. And I think what's giving me hope, Cirien, you reminded me of this, and this came up in conversations when I was doing work with you, Brett, too. The "another world is possible" quote, and also that we are building it together. There's Yuri Kochiyama behind MK, but the idea that we can envision the different world, like I can feel it and envision it very clearly, what those alternatives look like and what that feels like. That means it's real. And so that gives me hope, even though there's also a lot of despair in the path. But I think the fact that we can envision it means that it's real, and that energizes the work.
Yeah, I'm hopeful by all the conversations I'm finding myself in about, this way of thinking about decolonizing how we are existing in this moment, how we are in relationship with each other, with the land, with our visions of the future. That is bringing ease to me, because it really has felt for a long time that we are in this physical realm, but we're also in the spiritual realm, and we're also connected to so many that have paved the path for us, so many ancestors, not only of our lineages, but of ancestors of the land that we are on. And so I think that's one area I'm drawing hope from, is really regrounding and recognizing for myself the need of spiritual grounding in a way that we can really use to resource ourselves and each other. I love the idea of chaos as not just a negative thing, it's all energy. So how do we really harness our energy, including, these harder moments, into something that can be transformed, that can be really beautiful. And joy in terms of, joy, music, laughter, cooking, having conversations with all of you, just feeling connection in the middle of isolation. I think Brett brought that up already. And that's really where, when I'm able to access that feeling of connection, even though we're all kind of in these different worlds at the same time, that brings me immense joy.
Mm-hmm. What brings me a lot of joy are right now I'm thinking about geese and the lessons that geese offer us, right? And for a long time, I think definitely since Bolden's birth, who just made a cameo earlier and is now still here but just not on camera. I have been following, listening, learning, following I don't think I've been doing a lot of leading, and I'm definitely haven't been visible, but I've just been following, you know, the stuff that young people are doing, the stuff that elders, the stuff that people in our community are creating and learn and leading on. And I just, what's giving me a lot of joy is that is like us actually really hearing out like what Ella Baker has always been trying to tell us, right? Is that strong people don't need strong leaders, right? And that we are not individuals, we are a multitude, and how we're just based on how the wind is working, you know what I mean? Like people, you know, and what gifts are what gifts are called for that current moment, right? Is that we practice, like I just see more folks practicing decentralized, like there's so much more decentralized movement building, organizing, leadership, you know, like leadership that's happening all around me, and I'm witnessing it, and I'm just like, dang, that gives me so much life. Like, you know, like I have a little bit of FOMO because, you know, I feel like I'm still transitioning out of my 20s. Like I could have done, you know, Inspector Gadget, doing everything and all the things. And me now having, you know, we're in a pandemic, and I have like 2 really small littles, you know, that I'm tending to and raising. Like it brings me so much relief and joy that the work is happening. Beautiful work is happening everywhere. There is an abundance of that. Right. And I'm just really excited about visibilizing it, about amplifying it, connecting it to this public policy work that we are doing together. So that's where I'm at. That's it.
Well, this has been so beautiful, and I'm really excited to keep just having more of these conversations with all of you. Thanks everybody for tuning in. This was, you know, our way to just introduce the podcast to all of y'all, and for you to just get to hear where it came from, where it was born from. And we have a lot of gratitude for the long lineage of folks that have really paved the way for something like this to be possible right now. And so this is just the first episode. In 2021, we'll be coming back with the rest of the season. This is kind of a non-traditional format for hosts. There's not usually so many hosts for one podcast, but really felt important to be able to represent just our larger beloved community. And so you'll be seeing different iterations of some of us hosting certain episodes, kind of taking turns. We'll be in conversation with community, with leaders, with artists, with organizers, still reflecting on that question of what is this moment calling on us to do together. So it's been a blessing and a privilege, y'all. I'm really grateful to be in the space with you, and just stay tuned for what comes next in 2021.
Thank you all always.
Thank you all. Stay safe, stay healthy.
Thank you, everybody.
All right, peace, y'all.